Hello everybody and welcome to another Train Sim World 2 news video. Now today we're going to be having a look at DCG's fourth live stream, the Q&A on the Bakerloo Line, mainly. Well, that was the main purpose of it. They did talk about other bits, so of course I'll go through them. But yeah, mostly it's based on the Bakerloo Line. So today we're going to be having a look at that. So sit back, enjoy, and I'll tell you what I think about the live stream. So, without further ado, I'm going to get straight into the live stream, as I got a feeling this video may take a while to create. So, first off, obviously they played the trailer, we've all seen that, so I won't run that. If you want to see it, you can go and find it in YouTube and click the article and all that. This one is the fourth Q&A. They apparently plan to do at least one more Q&A live stream. As well as that, they're also going to do a gameplay stream. Now, I'm not sure if they're going to combine the Q&A and the gameplay into one, or if they're going to do two separate live streams, or what they're going to do about it. It might be that they answer some questions and play some of the game, and then they do another one and they do it. There's going to be at least one more stream, however, before the release of Train Sim World 2. So, we'll keep an eye out for that. I don't know how much of that footage I will actually show in the video, because for something like that, you really need to sort of go and actually watch it, but I'll give sort of a rundown of what I think about the footage they showed. So, first off, apparently they've had a few comments about the Preserve Collection and people not quite understanding what it is. The Preserve Collection, as we all know, is basically all the routes that are currently in Train Sim World 2, Train Sim World 2020 are being converted to run in Train Sim World 2. Since their announcement a couple of weeks ago that delayed the launch date of Train Sim World 2, they're adding the scenario planner for Train Sim World 2. Train Sim World 2020 Preserve Collection content. And they're also adding, which shocked me, they're also adding the variable adhesion to the stock from Train Sim World 2020. Now, I am very happy that they've taken this decision. I didn't think this was something they were going to do, so like I say, I'm shocked that they're doing this, but extremely happy. If you know, we're going to get the variable adhesion, and that's going to be what we need, sort of thing. You're actually going to slip in your Electro Star, and the WSP is going to kick in, and, you know, your 66 down the Great Western is going to struggle to pull away with its freight in wet conditions, and then your big freight trains over the Transpennine are going to struggle to get up the hill because of the slippage, and yeah, it's going to be amazing. Like I say, I wasn't expecting this, so I'm extremely pleased that they've actually taken this decision now to add the feature to the Preserve Collection. Obviously, we've got to hope that they actually do the feature correctly. If the variable adhesion is useless, then there's not really much point in them adding it. But it's so good that they're actually going back and they're actually doing an upgrade. It is more of an upgraded collection than Preserve Collection than it was before. So it's nice that they're actually upgrading stuff and they're doing stuff with it, which means that, you know, we're going to be able to use the content more availably and easily. And you're not going to sort of jump from Train Sim World 2 content back to Train Sim World Classic content and feel a bit sort of upset, or not upset, but, you know, sort of like underwhelmed. That's the word. You're not going to feel underwhelmed by the Train Sim World 2020 content in Train Sim World 2 after driving the Train Sim World 2 content. So that's going to be really good. They did, however, mention that, now it sounds like they may have mentioned this one before, but I've not heard anything about it, but apparently the Northeast Corridor is not going to be in the Preserve Collections. I believe the Northeast Corridor is their first Amtrak route that they made, and there's a whole bunch of DLC that goes along with that. But basically, all the DLC related to the Northeast Corridor and the Northeast Corridor itself is not going to be preserved at the moment. The reason for this is because apparently the setup is extremely old and it's really inefficient the way the game sort of works out, and they basically sort of didn't want to have that sort of inefficiency pulled across the Train Sim World 2020. I understand that. It would be a disappointment if you buy the content and it really doesn't work very well. At the same time, I do kind of feel they sort of should port it over. From what they were saying, they've not ruled out actually going back and upgrading the content to make it more efficient. But for now, it's not going to happen. Like I say, it does make me question, though, why they can bring over Great Western Express and they can bring over Rapid Transit, and yet they can't do this. Because surely if they were built around the same time, because the Northeast Corridor was the fourth route they made, so it's after them two I've just mentioned, If they can bring them across, despite the fact that they're probably just as inefficient, then why can't they do the Northeast Corridor? It does sort of raise a few eyebrows as to what their plan with that is, but hey, it's good they're bringing the other content. It's a shame they're not bringing that. So if you were excited to play that and get the new Degen physics and throw the trains into the scenario planner, I'm afraid you're not going to be able to for now. Like I say, they don't want to speculate about what they might do, but they didn't also rule out sort of not doing it entirely. They also mentioned future projects en route. They didn't talk about it, but we pretty much know it's going to be... There's going to be information on it on the public roadmap, which will be released apparently a week before launch. We don't know if that will actually be true still. They might decide, actually, we're not going to do it now. That might be delayed. But basically, a week before launch, as said before, they will release the public roadmap, which will state everything that they want to do to Train Sim Mod 2 eventually. So, next off, they probably took about half an hour to talk about route selection. Basically, how they pick routes and what sort of goes with selecting a route and then ultimately getting it into Train Sim. So, how do they pick a route to make? Apparently, it's a very long process, you would imagine so. There's a lot of people involved, a lot of research involved, a lot of licensing and sort of feasibility studies as to what can we do. Basically, if DCG have a license for a specific operating company, that might make it easier to actually build a route. So say when they went to do the London to Faversham route for Train Sim Classic, they had the license from Southeastern to use their brand, which meant that by the time they went and did the Chatham Mainline route, they literally only had to go back to Southeastern and say, we've already had your license, can we have it again to make this route? Whereas if it was an entirely separate route, say they'd made the London to Faversham, and then they decided to make, we'll go with the Portsmouth Direct Line, we'll say, for example, as just an example, they wouldn't be able to do that. They would actually have to go to South Western Railway and say, hello, we've never used you before, we are DCG, and this is what we want to do. Whereas with South Eastern, they wouldn't have to introduce themselves, they're just like, yeah, can we use your license again, please? I mean, obviously, it's a significantly longer-winded process than that in real life. But to basically sort of break it down as to how that works, that's pretty much how it works. It's easier to get a license for a product that you have than something that you don't have. It's also, like I say, people. So what the community wants. So apparently they look at the Dovetail forums and see what they want. And it's also personal preference on the developers themselves, what they actually want to spend their time developing. After all, there's no point developing something that the developers really don't want to make and then having it come out terrible. They might as well develop something that maybe not as many people want, but the developers are really passionate about, because then they're actually going to do a good job on it. On top of that, if people sort of suggest DLC that is made, and they decide that it's not feasible for some reason to do the route that they want, they may also use the theme. So say lots of people request a shunting route, or a steam route, or something. That'll make them think, right, okay, well, we know that people want this, let's do research into what other areas we can do. Pretty much the other thing that they... The other thing that they use to decide on whether to make a route or not is how sort of easily it can be produced. Can it be produced within a specific time? So say, for example, you've got a route and it has 20 stations. Can you build them 20 stations across X amount of miles of track within, I don't know, 3 months, we'll say. I don't know what the actual time scale is, but can you build the length of track required in the time scale that you have? And what are the custom assets like? Is it going to be a difficult decision? Is there a lot of research involved? Do we have everything we need? So if they've got a lot of assets already made, for example, for a route that is going to be 20 miles long, they can do that significantly quicker than a 20-mile route that they've got to produce everything for. So if they've got a UK library, and Matt Pedersen likes trees, and he was saying an example with trees. So if they've got a library of trees for the UK, and then they want to make a French route, we'll say, can they then use them same trees for the French route? Well, probably not. So that's going to take time, because they want to make new trees to make the French route seem more realistic to how it actually should be. So obviously that's going to take longer. So to make 30 miles of UK route would take significantly less time because they have the assets than 30 miles of French route. So in that case, they would quite possibly extend the route. See, this is what they're saying as well. If there's a project that they've earmarked and have said, right, this amount of time, this thing here is going to take this amount of time, this thing's going to take that amount of time, the next one, you know, and then they sort of find along the timescale that actually something doesn't take as long as they do. Apparently they can either add more detail, maybe add a new train to the project, or even just add some more scenery or length to the route. So if they find something that's easy to do, they'll produce it. So, like I say, for a French route, you might have 20 miles of track. For a UK route, they might be able to get away with 30, maybe even 40 in the same amount of time and still do a good job with it. So that links on to the fact that they were talking about other countries and why they don't do them. Again, they've got to produce all the assets for them countries, so it's easier to do the countries. It's more possible to do the countries that they've already done within the time scale than brand new countries. But they're always being suggested. So if you do have sort of a suggestion, please post it on the DCG forums, because apparently they're listening. And if you say they get a lot of requests for a Swiss route, or they get a lot of requests for an Austrian route, we'll say, for example, then if there's enough people saying we want this, this and this, they might sort of think, okay, there's a big demand from this country, let's go there and have a look and produce a route. And what they can remember, like I say, once they've got the custom assets for it, they can then potentially reuse some of them assets on the other route. Like they do with a lot of UK routes, for example, have the same buildings in them, or they've got the same trees in them. Sometimes they'll be reskinned and they'll look different, but overall you usually have the same models, and it's only sort of certain bits that they need to model specifically, such as stations and signage and that kind of thing. So overall it'd be significantly quicker and easier. So there was a question that was asked about why Colnacken isn't longer. Obviously it's a high speed route. 70 kilometres, 35 miles of high-speed route, or whatever it works out, isn't long for a high-speed route. You could probably crack that out in a few minutes. So it kind of makes you wonder why bother with such a small length. And, of course, it goes back to the timescale problem that if they've got to produce a lot of assets and a lot of length of scenery, it just takes them too long, and they can't meet their deadlines for their release schedules. Now, as much as I'm sure people in reality would like to see less releases and longer routes, the reality for TTG is that they can't spend an overly large amount of money on developing a route and not start getting anything back from it. So from a business perspective, because they are still a business, remember, they do need to have a constant income coming in, and their income sort of shoots up when they obviously release a new route, and then between releases it sort of gradually will go down over time, and they won't get much money by it before the next release sort of thing, because everybody's sort of like, yeah, I have it now, there's nothing more I need to buy. And then suddenly, oh, new route, everybody buys it at once, and the sales shoot up into the sky again. So they need to have a constant sort of release flow in order to have money coming into the company. Talking about money, however, that also links on to the fact that somebody asked if they were to make longer routes, would they cost more money? The answer to that, they said, interestingly enough, was no. Now, of course, they did say that if they sort of put more work into a route, more effort, and made it better, made more better trains, nicer scenery, all that kind of stuff, then yes, the price would go up of a route. But at the current rate of how it looks, if they can produce a longer route within the same amount of time, within the same time scale as what they've got now, then no, the price would stay exactly the same. So the actual length of the route has no sort of physical impact on the price of it. It's just the amount of work that's gone into it. So for example, the Bakerloo Line is sort of worth the same amount of money as, I don't know, the CSX Heavy Haul. CSX Heavy Haul is significantly longer than the Bakerloo Line, but they probably took around the same time to develop, because the Underground is apparently, according to Matt, apparently the Underground is the longest standing project that they have been working on everything. So it's taken the longest singular project to produce the Underground, because of all the custom assets and stuff. The platforms are really sort of intense, and there's a lot of modelling that's got to go on with them. So I can fully understand that, and it's better like that. Another thing that was mentioned was extensions with regards to route length, and of course extensions are possible. And apparently they can also make merges. And apparently we got 2 German routes. Now, I wasn't aware of this, but apparently we got 2 German routes that actually do link up. But there isn't sort of a actual link between the two. Apparently it's possible, but in order to link 2 routes, you'd need to have the timetables, the services, the scenarios. They'd all have to link across. And the only way to link them across would be to build the routes as one route. So, on a technical sense, it's not possible. On a physical sense, yeah, it's perfectly possible. You could literally link 2 routes up together, and people have done it in Train Sim. But for the scenarios, it's not possible. Having said that, I reckon, and I was thinking about this last night, but I reckon that maybe at Paddington, for example, on the Bakerloo Line, they should have a little icon. You walk out the station at Paddington, and then you hit an icon. That should then teleport you to Paddington Station on the Great Western Express. And it spawns you in as a passenger at the same time as when you sort of left the last route. So you could link between routes. You wouldn't technically be able to drive between them, but it would be cool if you can sort of link between ones. So you pull a train in, you grab your train at Reading, you pull it into London, you get off your train at London, leave it and stable it at London, let somebody else have it, walk up to the Bakerloo Line, change maps without even having to leave the game, and then you end up at Paddington, where you could ride a train to Queen's Park, for example, and then jump on a train and drive it down from Queen's Park. I think that would be really good if they did that. Like I say, it's not a perfect solution, but it's a good solution. One other thing is, they could always develop routes off of routes. So, for example, how you've got the Sheerness branch. The track is there on the London to Faversham, for example, but the scenery is not, and then you have to buy the Sheerness branch extension to get the scenery. Alternatively, they could do it on a sort of extension basis, where, say, the South Wales Coastal went to Cardiff, and then they extended it to Swansea. They could do that kind of thing, release another route, and you have to have... But do it that you have to have both routes in order to be able to play it. So that the Great Western Express can still be a standalone, but the Great Western Express and Didcot extension, for example, are just one route. So there's no Reading to Didcot routes, necessarily. There's just a London to Didcot route, which I think would be a way they should do it, personally. But like I say, this is not anything they've just confirmed. This is what I'm saying that I would like to see. Finally, with regards to future route selection, somebody asked what sort of the longest route you could do. Now, apparently, they've not tested it, but they reckon there's no technical limit. With Train Simulator 2020, you have a specific point, and basically, with the Google Maps overlay, we'll go with that, your coordinates link out from a single point, so your route origin is where your map starts. So it positions the coordinate of the map directly on that point. However, as it gets further away, the map, because obviously the world is round, unless you're a flat earther, but, you know, because the world is round, the map has to sort of be stretched to scale to make it seem like it fits correctly on the world, which then causes issues as to sort of the sizes and scaling of objects, and 20 miles in one place could technically be longer than 20 miles in another place because of how the world is stretched. Apparently Train Sim World 2 and Train Sim World uses several origin points which can sort of stretch the map out from each places, and then that basically reduces the sort of stretching of the world. Now, don't worry about this if you don't understand. It's only for people who are technically minded. I understand it mentally. I don't know if I've explained it very well, but it's basically, there's no limit. They've not tried it, but maybe one day we'll see what happens. So, the main point of the live stream is, of course, the Bakerloo Line. Now, according to DGG, which doesn't surprise me, the Bakerloo Line is not the most frequently suggested underground route. But there is a very good reason why they've decided to do it, and to be honest, I'm in full support of the way they've done this. There's a big desire, this is what I was saying about sort of suggestion. Lots of people have suggested various different London Underground lines, and they've sort of, apparently they had a look. They sort of went to the tube map and they were like, right, we've got 11 lines that we could possibly make a map of. Which one are we going to choose? And they were like, right, we could do this one, we could do this one. What's the advantages? What's the disadvantages? They basically went up to the automatic lines, for example, and went, well, we could do one of these, but overall, automatic operation is in use. So do we want to produce a route that you mostly would use automatic, but in Train Sim World you would mostly drive it? And they decided that they wouldn't like to do this. Now, I would love to see an ATO system line built into Train Sim World 2. I reckon something like the DLR or the Central Line or even the Victoria Line would be brilliant in Train Sim World 2. It would work really well, and you could take manual control and drive it. However, I can also sort of understand their logic for that. On top of that, they've then got to build brand new signalling systems and brand new sort of physics and ways of thinking within the game in order to be able to produce everything and make it work properly. Which, at the end of the day, they wanted to sort of experiment with the underground. They've never produced an actual underground route before. Obviously, we've had the Preserve Collection come out for the London Underground Heritage stock. That's it, Heritage Collection. But they've never actually produced an underground route. So they basically wanted to sort of test out the theory of how possible is this, which is why they went for the Bakerloo Line. The Bakerloo Line basically uses conventional signalling, and therefore it was easy to set up. On top of that, the Bakerloo Line also has one of the fewest stations. When they were looking at when they were looking at ideas for London Underground routes, they were looking at the amount of stations, trying to work out how long it would take to create everything. And basically, a lot of underground routes, as we all know, have a significant amount of stations. They're like half a mile apart and across like 20-30 miles of track. That's a lot of stations. The Bakerloo Line only has about 25 or something, I think it is. So it was significantly easier than certain other lines to produce the Bakerloo Line. So basically, it had the potential, it had the shortness, and it was basically the easiest one for them to produce. And they're going to start with the Bakerloo Line, see how the community reacts to that, see what we want on top of this, and then go from there. So they didn't sort of... They confirmed that they'd be happy to sort of work on routes, London Underground routes, in the future if there's a desire for it. Somebody also asked, is it possible to extend the Bakerloo Line up to Euston and across to Watford Junction, and then we could get the Overground and the 378s. They've said no at the moment. It would be nice if maybe one day we get that. It would be nice, but for now it's a no. Of course, they confirmed also that it was the entire line from Harrow and Willesden to Elephant and Castle, including London Road sidings, Stonebridge Depot, and the turnback siding at Harrow and Willesden. Somebody also asked, which is a very good question that I hadn't even thought of, does it include Kilburn High Road? Now, if you don't know, when you get to Queen's Park, you go down underground and you go to Kilburn Park. There's also the overground route that goes towards Euston. Now that goes through Kilburn High Road. At Kilburn High Road, there is a turnback potential for Bakerloo Line trains. So if they're sent the wrong way, they can actually go up to Kilburn High Road and then turn back and come down. Which that would have been an amazing sort of opportunity that they could have used. They could have been one service in a day up there, for example, and there could have been a scenario that terminated up at Kilburn High Road. Unfortunately, we're not that fortunate, and there's no Kilburn High Road being added to the route, but that would have been a cool feature. So, how did they get the reference for the routes? Well, they used a lot of photographs. They had a couple of reference strips with TFL, although apparently a lot of these were done within the COVID sort of situation, which kind of makes you think, how long have they actually been developing this route for? It can't be that long. I would guess maybe 3 months by the sound of things. Though I would have thought that to develop a route like that, you'd probably want a couple of years, if I'm being perfectly honest. So, who knows? There was also a lot... On these reference trips, however, they took a lot of photos and sound recordings, which is good. So, hopefully they've got some nice sound recordings. They also took some runs up and down the line to see how it works. They got cab and interior pictures. I think they went to one of the depots, maybe, and they got to have a look inside a train and talk to some real drivers and stuff. Apparently, they've also got some real drivers on the beta team. Apparently, a lot of projects also say... sort of underground projects and... whatever have you have said, oh yeah, we got drivers on the team, and apparently a lot of drivers are like, so much sort of, wow, this is pretty good, that they don't actually sort of compare it to real world experiences. So we'll see if that has any effect. Hopefully it does. Hopefully we get a better route as a result of that. They also use cab ride videos, old and new pictures, driver training videos, and basically just everything they can to create the route as close as possible. So of course the next question was about the West Coast Main Line AI. The answer to that is simply no. There is no AI on the West Coast Main Line. There are no scenario paths, and apparently the scenario creator paths are not there because you have to have a route that is possible to be driven. You have to have a route that is drivable. You have to have a route that is drivable by the player, and as there's nowhere reasonably drivable on the route, there are no AI paths. Apparently there are all the tracks there for the West Coast Main Line, so all the stations, all the 4-track main line, the points, the yards, the Wilson's all there apparently, but unfortunately we can't actually put any trains on there or drive them. As a result, they've also hidden the West Coast Main Line track on the 2D map, so that people can't see it and get confused as to which bits are actually relevant to the route and which bits aren't. Which is fair enough, I understand, and I get it that they would do that. So I think that's a good thing that they've removed it, if I'm honest, because it does help you, especially when you're doing a scenario creation. It can get a bit confusing if there's 20 tracks and you can only actually use 3 of them reasonably. So I understand that. That makes perfect sense. On top of that, there's also no access to any of the West Coast Main Line. You can't walk around on it and have a bit of a play around on it. And apparently, if you were to try and do it, it's not been tested, so you'd probably end up falling through the ground somewhere, they reckon. And that could be interesting. To be honest, I want to know if there's a way that you can actually break the world boundaries. I'd imagine there probably is some kind of developer console within the game that you can sort of fly around the world. So I'd love to see if we can actually fly around the world and actually get the wrong side of the barrier, of the invisible world boundaries on the West Coast Main Line, and have a walk around and see if we can find any faults with the map that would mean it would break. I'd love to see if we could do that. That'd be amazing. In addition to that, you apparently also can't walk in the tube tunnels. Now, I fully support them on this, because, let's face it, if you were to walk down a tube tunnel in real life, and a train comes along, there would be nowhere to go. You wouldn't be able to sort of get out the way of the train, so it's literally sort of asking people to be stupid, to be honest. So I am in support of you not being able to walk around in tube tunnels. Obviously you'll be able to walk around inside the carriages and all that. There's also going to be no external cameras in the tube tunnel because of the way the game clips and it does really weird things, so... But with regards to the walking, yeah, you can't walk. I would like to know, however, what happens if you open the M door in the tunnels. Like, can you sort of leave the train through the M door, or maybe they're even going to lock out the M door. If you don't know, the M door is the door on the front of the train, which you can use in an emergency exit in a tunnel. So is that going to be able to be used or not? Also, are we going to be able to open the passenger doors in a tunnel? Who knows? Apparently the rail gaps are simulated as close to their real world positions as possible, and they use the references in order to try and work out where all of the rail gaps are. As a result, obviously, I believe they're going to be using the same sort of setup as the East Coast Way, where the power actually cuts out if you go over a rail gap. So, if you're shunting around the yard and you stop in the incorrect place, you may actually be able to gap the train, which could be interesting. I'm not entirely sure how the game would cope with that, but it would be interesting to find out, and that might be a challenge to see if we can actually gap a train in Train Sim World 2. Now, there was one part that I didn't hear the start of the conversation properly, unfortunately, but apparently there was something wrong with the reference photos. They used the wrong reference photos for their model of the 72 stock, and apparently it had some kind of equipment that was either different or non-existent or whatever now, and they had a lot of comments, so they've removed or fixed the problem that they had with the equipment. Like I said, I don't actually know what it was. I didn't actually hear what it was, so... But yeah, basically your train's apparently more accurate than when they first announced it. So, then they talked a little bit about some lighting within the route. And the first question was, is there going to be arcing? The answer to that is no, there's no arcing. If you don't know what arcing is, it's basically where the train produces a massive spark as it goes over a piece of track. And the London Underground is very well known for its arcing. There's a lot of sparking and all that kind of stuff that goes on the Underground. Unfortunately, they're not going to do that, and that's simply because the lighting team that would have been able to do it have been basically busy trying to sort out the station lighting. Now, I would rather see the station lighting be perfect than have some arcing, because the arcing probably won't be all that noticeable. It would be nice in a tunnel, however, if you're going along and suddenly the entire tunnel just lights up because your train's had a spark, and that would be cool. But overall, yeah, I'd definitely like to see the platforms look better and no arcing. Somebody also asked about signalling. Apparently there are no approach control signals, which is a bit of a shame considering JT managed to do it. However, Just Trains also probably had a longer period of time for producing the Metropolitan line, which meant that they could actually introduce the signals. But apparently there's no approach controls, and there's also no tripcocks. The tripcocks on the ground are modelled, but they're not animated. So if you pass through a tripcock, you're not going to be able to stop the train and reset the tripcock and carry on your way. You're just going to get the normal pass through a red signal, game over message, which is unfortunate, but at the same time, it kind of would happen like that anyway, so in a way, tripcock is not entirely necessary. Leading on from that, there was also a question about safety systems. Now, the Deadman handle is one that I've sort of been slightly intrigued to see how they're going to implement it. Are they going to do a thing where you hold down the key and you can override it, or so like how the S-Dock works, or are they going to do something differently? Apparently, the Deadman handle is implemented, and it's going to be automatic controlled. However, apparently by default that is, apparently there's also the option to manually override to the Deadman handle, so that you can control it yourself. And I don't know how that's going to work, if you just press a button to release it and then you press a button to put it down, or if you hold a button to keep the pedal down, the handle, sorry. I really hope that it's the latter option, but who knows. But by default, like I say, the handle will be down. Having said that, you can release the handle, and you will get the air leak sound effects when you release the handle. If you don't know, when you release the handle, basically you get a sort of an air leak, which basically acts as an alarm to say you've released the handle, and the train will stop. You've basically got to reset it, and then the air leak will stop. It's a purposeful air leak, of course. It's supposed to be there, but that's been simulated. So if you do release the handle, you will get the sound effects for the air release, and you won't be able to take the power until the train has reset itself. Until you've reset the train. Regarding brakes, we've got both the rheostatic and the Westinghouse brake. You can disable the rheostatic using a switch in the rear of the cab. And in order to do that, you'll then be able to use just the Westinghouse brake to brake, which will be significantly harder, apparently, than just braking with the rheostatic. So that could be an interesting challenge to try and do. From this point, they then showed a video of the cab of the train. So I'll run this in the background while I explain all this. So important switches to consider are that there is a cutout for the drop-down interlock. So basically, on the Bakerloo Line, if you lower the drop-down window, the doors, you won't get brake release until you close the window. There's also a cutout switch, which means that you can open the window without releasing the without losing brake release. So you can cut out the door, the interlock on the window, and move the train while the window is open, and won't affect the interlock of the train and allow you to move the train. The roller blind, of course, can be moved. The train number, service mode will set that automatically. So if you don't know what that is, that's the 3-digit number in orange LEDs on the front of the train. The service mode will set that because the train carries the same number all day. There's also some heater switches, rate switches, passenger lights, cab lights, headlights, tail lights. There's a brake test that works as well. There's a reverser interlock, which means that you can cut out whether you want to reverse or not. The door override enable button also works, but I don't know if that's a feature that has been fully implemented. So overall, you've pretty much got more or less every switch in the cab. There are a few that don't work, but overall, 90% of the switches, I would say, actually do work in the cab of the 1972 stock, which is great. I'm very glad that they've decided to take that decision and add all of the buttons that work. So hopefully it's going to be similarly close to the sort of the CSX locos, the way they're sort of set up, and they work really well. You get a lot of stuff you can switch on them. Next up, they mentioned the fact that obviously people had seen the mirrors. I'd obviously mentioned the fact that the mirrors were reflecting in the last video. Apparently, the setup of the mirrors is not sort of total. So the mirrors aren't perfect, so they won't reflect certain objects, and They may not reflect the train if you're not looking at it, but they are set up that they will reflect objects. And apparently the way it's been done is in order to be able to reduce the cost of the frame rate. A real reflection would apparently take up a lot of frames and a lot of CPU, but doing this is basically no frame rate dropping. I'm guessing it's a similar way to the fact that if you look into some trains, you can see a nice reflection off of them. So the East Coastway 377, for example, is very reflective. Likewise with the Great Western trains, they're also quite reflective. So I'm assuming it's going to be a similar setup to that. They also quickly mentioned that the digital clocks are actually working. Going back to the external camera, inside tunnels. Again, the external camera will not work inside tunnels. It will work out of the tunnel sections. But when you're in stations, if you press any external camera, you'll get a head-out camera, which you can use, obviously, to see the platform and close the doors easier. So, the scenarios of the route. There are 5 scenarios. There is 1 tutorial. The 5 scenarios follow on from the tutorial, and there's various items within the scenarios, sort of taking the train out of London Road Depot, doing a few services, and then at the end of the day it will put it back into the depot. So there's several bits throughout the scenarios that will guide you through the life of a driver, pretty much. The scenario planner has lots of different paths, including some of the carriage sidings, so you can start and end in the carriage sidings. I want to know, however, when you set up the scenario editor, how is that going to work with them train numbers we mentioned earlier? Are you going to be able to set the train number manually within the scenario editor, or is it just going to be blank, or what? That could be interesting to see. Now, certainly my favourite bit, but I reckon a lot of other people like it, service mode. I absolutely love service mode, and I really wish Train Sim 2020 would have a service mode. But I think it's great that Train Sim World has the service mode, and you can literally jump into a train, any sort of run you want, and you can drive it. It saves a lot of time sort of downloading scenarios if you want to do specific services. You can literally just look through every service on the timetable and you're like, oh, I want to drive that one. I'm driving it. So, with regards to that, there are going to be 200 services included, which sounds like quite a few on the Bakerloo Line, until you consider that there's actually only 9 trains out on the line. 9 trains on the entire Bakerloo Line. That is not a lot. That apparently equates to around a 10-minute wait between each train. And that's not always true. Sometimes it will be shorter if the trains are close together, and sometimes it'll be longer if they're further away from each other. But on average, it will be a 10-minute wait. Which, the whole point of people asking for the underground was because it will be frequent and it will work well with service mode. So you can jump in a train and you can arrive at a destination and you can more or less instantly take another train out and you go somewhere else with that train, and then you take another train out and you've not got a lot of waiting around. 10 minutes is a very long time to wait in a game. In real life, it's probably not that bad. But in a game, you don't want to be standing around on a platform for 10 minutes. You want to be doing something at more or less all times. However, there is a bright side to this. They're work in progress, is a new timetable with 450 services. That's going to include 20 trains running up and down the line. That's going to slash the waiting time in half to 5 minutes. That's still a long time to wait for a train, but it's significantly better than having to wait 10 minutes for a train. Of course, like I said, there's a lot more trains that you can use. The only reason why they're not doing further scenarios and more services is the fact that it's a closed route, so they have to basically follow the life cycle of a train throughout an entire day. It makes it significantly more complex to produce a scenario, and I understand that. You've got to manage every train, you've got to make sure it's in the right place at the right time, and if something's out of time with the real timetable, then it's going to mess everything up. So it'd be a lot of experimenting, it would take a lot of time to produce a timetable for that service, for that route, so I understand that entirely. So, sounds. Now, of course, we're yet to hear the sounds, so we'll have to make a decision on how they're actually good, how they're actually done, and how well they've been done. But apparently there are going to be a lot of sort of flange squeals and creaks and groans and all sorts of stuff from the train. So hopefully it all sounds really good. They wanted to build up the sort of environment, the noisy environment of the underground, and how the trains are really noisy and all that. Apparently, you'll hear the other trains clashing over junctions and stuff, and Apparently, according to Matt Bezzleston, it feels right audibly. We shall see, especially when you obviously compare it to the likes of Armstrong Powerhouse sound packs, but we shall see how realistic it actually seems at the time. On top of that, they mentioned, unfortunately, we already knew this, but there are no announcements on the train. There's no sort of system that they've built yet. Maybe one day they'll build a system that allows announcements, and then we can see it in the game, but until then, unfortunately, we're not having announcements. Now, in a way, I understand, but in a way I also don't understand, because it's part of the underground to have announcements. So why not just build the system now? As soon as you build the system, you can use it. You've got more opportunity later on to use it, sort of thing. The sooner you get it, the more you can include it in. So why not do it now? Like I say, it would take time though, so I can see it from that perspective, why they would not. So, finally, they mentioned the passengers. Now, the passengers are a big thing within Train Sim World 2, especially for the Bakerloo Line. Obviously, the underground is absolutely rammed in the rush hours, and it can go a bit quieter in the day, and then it's rammed in the evening rush hour, and, you know, you really want to recreate that experience. You want to have your trains absolutely packed. So, there were questions, obviously, on the number of passengers. They confirmed that yes, there are slots where the passengers can stand up in the trains. Apparently people standing in the trains makes the train feel significantly busier than if there were just people sitting down. However, they've also had to be careful how they set up passengers standing, because the player has to be able to walk through the train with the passengers still there. So they can't literally just put a passenger slot in every single location. I understand it, it's a shame, but we can get around it as long as there's passengers standing, because you get people standing on the underground, and they're not just all going to sit down and then they're going to stand, because you get people who for some reason stand up when they could easily sit down. But there are standing passengers. So in the next few months to a year, they also want to work on a passenger overhaul project. Now, with this project, they're hoping that they can mix up the diversity of people. Firstly, they want to make people act as they should. So obviously you don't just get people walk up and stand around on a platform just waiting for the train. You get people looking at their phones. You might get people drinking a cup of coffee. You might get people listening to music on their headphones. We've had all this in Train Sim Classic, and it was really great when they started to add that kind of thing. So now they're bringing it into Train Sim World 2, and it would be really nice if this was dynamic. I'd love to see a passenger that, you know, not just, you don't just have a passenger that's like always on their phone or always doing this or that. I'd love to see a passenger who like pulls out their phone, has a look at it, takes a sip of their coffee and puts their phone away, stands around for a bit, looks around, checks his watch, pulls his phone out again because he's bored, and puts his phone, you know, a sort of a randomised animation, rather than just the standards, right, he's going to look at his phone, he's going to tap on it until he walks, and then he's going to walk off with his phone. I'd love to see them actually dynamically pull the phone out of their pocket and have a look at it. Or a newspaper, for example. Stick the newspaper under your arm and stand around, and then you get bored and you have another read in the newspaper, and then stick it back under your arm, and sort of that kind of thing. Stuff that's easy to animate, and it's still repeatable, but it doesn't look set up. It looks natural. Because, you know, you don't just get people constantly looking at their phones. I mean, yeah, you get some people who constantly will look at their phones. But you'll get people, you know, they'll look at their phone for a minute, and then they'll put it away, and then they'll pull out the phone again, and, you know, all that kind of thing. So I'd love to see that. Especially if you've got people, they put their phone away, and then they pull their phone out instantly afterwards. That would be quite cool to see, actually. They also plan to add more passenger models to the game. Now, I'm really excited for this. I would love to see there be more of an ethnic diversity within Train Simulator. There's not many sort of cultures and religions represented yet. Likewise, there's not all that many different ethnicities of people yet. So I'd love to see more diversity within the game. I reckon it would be significantly more inclusive if they add people of different country origin, different religion, different gender. It'd also be nice if we had some people who would like group together. So you had groups of friends maybe, or you had, I don't know, a couple. And then on a couple you could have a gay couple and a lesbian couple, and it'd be nice if there's all that diversity within the game, showing off all the different people, because if that's included, that's going to make people want to play the game more. On top of that, it'd also be nice if we get some of their models of the passengers as drivers, so we've got more diversity, and it's more representative of how your character is and who you want to be, and therefore represent that within the game. It would make the game significantly more inclusive for people. So, the last question was of course based off of the passenger information screens. Now, I've already said that they confirmed they wouldn't add these, but now they've added them. And they showed a video on this, so I shall play this video now in the background. Basically, the story goes that because the release date has been pushed back for the release of Train Sim World 2, the developers have had more time. And there was a bunch of them who were like, well, until we start the next project, we don't have a lot to do. And then they were like, well, why don't we work on the passenger information system? And you'll see it in the background. So, pretty much, and it's quite funny how the board says up to 43 minutes and the gaps in the service are so massive. But pretty much what you've got is it works on a perfect timetable. So, your train is timetabled to arrive at, we'll say, 12 o'clock midday. And then there's one due to arrive at 12:05 midday. It will count down, the board will count down to 12 o'clock. Then the board will count down to 12:05. And it will work like that. If you get delayed while you're running along the line, the board won't dynamically update to display that time. So there is a possibility that when you get to a station, the board is actually displaying an entirely incorrect train if you're too late. I've got a feeling that may occur, and you may just sort of look at the board and it says Harrow and Willesden 2 minutes, and you're going to Queen's Park and you're thinking, well, that's not me, but technically your train should have gone. Now, it's a shame it's not dynamic. I understand why it's not dynamic, however, and I would significantly rather see this produced in this way, but I would significantly rather this be produced like this than us to have nothing. The boards wouldn't look very good if they're blank. So to have this is great. Now they've all got the technology, they can also add it to other routes. They're not going to add it to any other routes included yet, but for future projects, it will be easy to add. Apparently, all they've got to do pretty much is just install the artwork to the game in order to be able to show different messages. So we could have all future sort of mainline runs with destinations, for example. That would be really good. It's interesting though that when the train pulls in, nobody actually gets off. Matt Pedersen blames it on the dev build, but who knows. They also then showed another video at Queen's Park, which I'll flick to now. Interestingly to note is that the inside of it, when I first saw it, the inside of Queen's Park actually looked like real life. And then I looked out through the bridge, out onto the line behind, and I actually almost thought that it looked like open BVE, which is an interesting thought. The lighting looks a bit odd on it, but I did think it looked a bit like open BVE. But anyway, you can see that we've got the boards up there, and they're actually displaying all of the calling pattern and when the next train is due and all that. And then it flicks to a train approaching, which is really nice to see, and I can't wait to see this. A couple of questions I have for it. Will it work in scenarios that have been created by DTG, and will it work in the scenario planner and creator? Who knows? Who knows? We shall find out at the time. So, that's it for the questions. All they mentioned then was that, again, there'll be another live stream. They'll mention the delivery designer, apparently, and there'll be some gameplay, and there'll be some more Q&A. So that is pretty much it for this video. Thank you very much for watching, everybody. I hope you've enjoyed it. If there's anything I've missed, or anything you want to say about it, please let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your opinion, and we can have a discussion about it. But anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time. Goodbye!